Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's Mastering Blueforce, the weekly series webinar. This one for the week of May the 1st. Today's session will be entitled Exploring the Job Record. Now, for our session today, as always, we do have everyone currently muted. So if you have any questions or any concerns during today's call, please do me a favor. Enter your question in the control panel area there in the question section, and I'll address it at the appropriate time during our call today. Now, as we go through today's session, we have a couple items we want to talk about in regards to the job record. Now, we want to first go through and we start talking about the job record. Not too much as a whole is being done right now in the job record. Most of the items that are in the job record relate to the time collection piece and kind of settings revolving around that. But before we get into the settings and whatnot, we're going to first go through the JDE2E Pay Interface, just a quick recap of how that works. We'll go through and look at what fields are valuable to you, the user, on the actual job record. Once we finish there, a lot of those settings on the job record directly affect the invalid punch scores for your overall ePay compliance. So I want to go through and just recap a little bit for some of those that may have not been a part of previous conversations on invalid punch, but go through and discuss what is an invalid punch and how do I correct an invalid punch in Blueforce. So overall, we're going to be focusing on the job record today. So let's get started and with our first topic, the JDE2E Pay Interface. Now, for those that joined a webinar a couple weeks back, about a month ago, we did a webinar, a two-part webinar on the employee. And the employee webinar was going through and looking at the interface there, how things interfaced with the employee record, etc. And the job record you'll find is very similar to that. The only major difference there is obviously the type of data between the two pieces and kind of how it's set up over on the JD Edwards side. So when we're talking about the JDE2E Pay Interface, JDE will send data to Blueforce every 30 minutes, and that's basically at the top of the hour and at the bottom of the hour. And when it sends data back and forth, it's sending the employee information that I was referring to. It's going to send the jobs information that we talk about today, and it's also sending work orders over into Blueforce. Now this happens every 30 minutes. Part of this as well, one of the things that's not on there that actually falls under the job section is the tasks. So if there are any tasks that are updated or changed over on the JDE side, the Blueforce side will pick it up within that 30-minute interval as well. But it's very critical as a big picture here that everything is set up correctly in JDE the first time. That way, you know, we have no issues. Employees can punch in and punch out without having any problems as well. Now, jobs are set up via the JDE job staging process. And the reason we have this job staging process is because we want to ensure that the address info is set up correctly. We want to make sure that other key financial fields are also accurate. So when we set up stuff in JDE, it's not just for the benefit of Blueforce. It does affect a bunch of other areas on the financial side as well. So one of the big things about the job address, and we'll talk about a little bit here when I review the specific tabs on the job record, is the job address and how it relates to your GPS functionality for those that are using the mobile punch, as well as for those that have any reference anywhere to the address in the system. If we put the wrong address in Blueforce or JDE and it comes over to Blueforce incorrectly, we're going to have a whole bunch of things that are going to be messed up because of that address, anywhere from the time zone to the location of the geo-fencing capabilities on the mobile punch, and the list just goes on from there. But there's a lot of issues if you don't get stuff right in JDE first. That's really the extent I want to go through as far as the interface piece goes. Just know that every 30 minutes, whenever a change is made over in the JDE side, within a 30-minute window, like I said, the top of the hour and the bottom of the hour, the system will send that information over to Blueforce for your use at that point. So that kind of takes me into the Blueforce job record. Now the Blueforce job record it's a critical component of the system because, like I mentioned, we don't actually go in there all that often as users, but you will find out that after today's session, you may want to start using it a little bit more than what you have been doing. The job information, the job record has a whole bunch of information from just basic how a clock is set up to how the mobile punch is configured, to what phone numbers are valid on the job, to shift differentials, to how do we set up certain rules to pay a certain way at the job level. you name it. There's a lot of different little things like that, little caveats that actually benefit everyone on this phone call. And as we go through today's session, please take notes, I guess, to say to mental notes, and a lot of other things that might be actual benefit to you. I know the ePay team has been working with a lot of you on a variety of different calls, and a lot of this information that we reviewed today might have come up in those calls just because we felt that it was beneficial or could help you a little bit in some way or another. So one of the things I'll point out is when you log into Blueforce, you're going to see the jobs icon right there in the middle of the screen. This one's highlighted here with a red arrow. But at this point, this jobs module is accessible by all editors, submitters, and approvers. Now, what you will notice is you can actually go into that module. You can go in there and view a lot of the information, but there are only key areas within the jobs module that you can actually edit the information. So bottom line, all editors, submitters, and approvers can at least go in there and view at a minimum, but you'll be able to go in there and actually edit a few key components that we'll go through on today's call. Now, the first section of the job record that I like going through is just going through and calling this the informational fields. Most of the job record is going to be locked out for you because, as I've mentioned earlier, everything starts in JDE Edwards. So kind of the general process is everything starts in JDE and ultimately will finish off in JDE because JDE is our system of record. So for that, when we go in to set up a job, we don't set up jobs, but when we go in there and get the jobs process going, and then it goes to the job staging process to be approved and set up as an official job. At that point, we don't want anyone going in there and making their own changes to the job, so it's locked out. So to that, you're not going to be able to go in there and change the address, you're not able to change the job number, the name of the job, etc., unless you go back into JDE, follow that same process to make those changes from JDE. And within that 30-minute window, it'll sync over via that interface and update in Blueforce. So the job record, one of the things you'll notice is the informational side of things is when you go to the job record, the top half of the job record denoted here it has like these little orange little sections. I guess you'll call them little orange tabs, but these little orange sections here are letting you know that these areas are going to be protected. So when you go in as a Blueforce user, an editor, submitter, approver, these areas are going to be view only. So you can go in there and only view the items. Now you will see in a little bit when we talk about the tabs, you may see some orange tabs, but the orange tabs, really what this is telling you is that part, if not all of that section, has some type of read-only capability for you that you can edit. However, I will note that there were some key areas in the system that you'll be able to edit, although it shows it being orange. And I'll explain those here a little bit when we go a little bit further down. But from the informational side, you'll see the job information at the top of the screen. So you can quickly go in there and see the employee ID. You can see, the job ID, sorry, the job name, etc. You'll be able to see right to the right of there what type of time collection is being in use at the site. When you start punching in and punching out at these jobs, the system automatically put a little logo, a little icon there for you, denoting if it's a phone-in job like this one is. Is it a Walter job? A little time clock will show there. Is it a mobile punch, which shows a little phone, etc. So it's got some little icons there. Let's quickly identify what type of time collection is being used at this job site. Down below, you'll see the address information. And then one thing I'll point out is the time zone. And there's a little box here that's pointed out. The time zone is important because, and I spelled address wrong there, but the time zone actually is going to be determined based on the site address. So the site address is incorrect, the time zone could be potentially off, meaning that your employee's punches could be potentially off an hour, 2 hours, or worse, greater than that. Bottom line, the total hours would be fine, but the actual punches would show a little off. But bottom line, the time zone is driven off of that address. So it makes it very important that the address is correct, and that's why we go through that job staging process that we have in place now. Now, furthermore, we have two tabs back in the back here. These two tabs, when you click on them, it'll actually expand it to look like the location and contact section is a little wider. You can actually see the data under there. So if you were to go in and click on one of those, you're going to actually see the miscellaneous section populate. at which point you'll see the export category will then reflect the job's district. So in this case, the export category field, if you ever want to know what district this job is part of or what the system thinks it's a part of, you can always click on it, expand that section, and see the district being, in this case, 40104. Same thing with the timesheet settings if you wanted to go in there. However, the timesheet settings really has no settings that you'll be able to really do anything with. So I can always kind of bypass that piece, as those settings are actually defaulted from a bigger level at a ISS entire company level. So those are kind of driven from that standpoint. But informational fields at the top of the screen, just for your notice, just for your information. Now, the second part of this is the Blueforce tabs. And the Blueforce tabs are the tabs that are available at the bottom of the job record in Blueforce. When you go to the job record, once again, the screens I just showed you will be the top half of the screen. Your tabs will be at the bottom of the screen. Now, these tabs, there's 6 in all. These are the tabs that are actually going to drive the way the job interacts with the employee, or how the job interacts with any other rules or settings we have in the system. So it's important that when we go through these, if there's something that that seems to be more maybe something that to be of use to you, or something that you're wondering as hey, that's why the job responds a certain way, make a mental note, and we'll have it there, and you'll know for the future why things are happening a certain way. But essentially, the 6 fields that are going to be talked about today are these 6 shown here. Sorry, 6 tabs. And these tabs are going to be as follows. You're going to have the Web Configuration tab, which is the first tab here. Oh, let me go back, sorry. The second tab is the Fonen and Time Clock Setup tab. And what that actually does, so you can kind of look at that, it looks at the Fonen settings and clock settings, and I'll go into the detail on that momentarily. You have the Mobile Configuration tab that looks at your mobile punch and your mobile app and stuff like that. Settings are revolving around that. Your Holiday and Exception Dates tab, which is a new one that, I want to say it's new, it's been there since day one, but it's new in the fact that we're having more and more users go this route and save themselves some time. So I'm going to hold that a little bit, explain a little bit more than that. I'll talk about that here shortly on tab 4. We'll also have tab 5 for shift schedule and tab 6 for pay differential. So these are 6 tabs that are very important as it relates to the job record. Now, the first one we're going to talk about here is the Web Configuration tab. Now, the Web Configuration tab, and you'll notice it's in orange. If you look up here on this screen, you'll see that you have 2 tabs that are in blue. And the 2 tabs in blue are really what they mean is it's wide open. There's no security. There's nothing preventing any of the fields in those 2 tabs to be blocked out from the users. But the other tabs actually have some information that is either all read-only only, or it's partially read-only. It has some type of security on those tabs, and that's what the orange means in this case. In this first tab, actually everything in this section on the right-hand side is actually blocked out for you, but it really doesn't matter because most of us would never go into this Web Configuration tab anyhow. Now, the Web Configuration tab, just to share with you, is a couple of things you'll see in here. I like to address is the default settings that are applied for this particular job. Now, here on the right-hand side, you will see that you have some settings that are kind of grayed out for you. You can't touch them. You can't do anything with them. You can press the little, I believe, press the little question mark, let you know some detail about those fields, but you can't change them. Now, what these default settings do, it just applies defaults for the employee. If for some reason the employee, some way, shape, or form was not set up correctly in Blueforce, and then JDE, sorry, and via the interface, if the system typically will catch a couple things. We have a couple key critical fields in JDE that says, if they're not set up correctly, it's not going to send the employee over. But if it has those critical fields filled in, but it's missing some other information, the system might pull their default settings for the specific job they're working on from this particular section. So typically what happens is let's say, for example, this has been taken care of recently, but the pay group field used to not be a field that used to be required over on the JDE side, believe it or not. So when they came over to Blueforce, if the employee was blank over in JDE, the system will automatically assign them to a default pay group, and it would pull from this particular setting. Now, no, that doesn't happen anymore because now it's a required field in JDE, and if it doesn't have it coming over in the interface, it's going to stop it and require that to be fixed before it actually gets sent over. But that's an example of what these default fields are there for. And this is, like I said, these are just fallbacks in the event that something wasn't set up correctly. Now, occasionally we do have employees that are sent over with tasks. For example, maybe you have an employee who's an engineer task over in JDE. But when they get sent over, the system knows that the default job is, this particular job we're looking at here. Well, if this particular job in Blueforce is not set up with that engineer task, the system says, well, he needs to have a task to work. Since engineer is not valid in Blueforce for this job, I'm going to go ahead and assign him that default task that's here. So in this case, the employee being an engineer would fail, but the system will pass them through and assign them a carpet tech task over in Blueforce. That way, the employee can still punch in and punch out, albeit maybe not the right task, but it's actually punching in and punching out. From there, we can adjust the task by going to the employee profile and doing some adjustments there. But that's another different step. But bottom line, this web configuration tab is just going to give you some basic settings to adjust. Now, one setting that we left wide open for you guys to adjust is the display lunch row and timesheet option. Now, as you know, in the timesheet view is going to show you the lunch deductions that are taken. Most of our companies doing the manual lunch deductions. The automatic lunch deductions, which automatically takes out the half hour, whatever the lunch deduction is. But you do see it on the timesheet view when you go to timesheet to review time for submission and approvals. So in doing that, the timesheet view, gives you that extra line for every employee, which just says lunch, and it shows half hour every day. Now that's an unpaid lunch line, and many Blueforce users don't like seeing that extra detail on their screen. So what they decide to do is they want it removed. Well, if we toggle this little option to no, the system will remove that detail from the screen, and you don't have to no longer see the lunches. So if that is something that has been bothering you, you can reach out to the ePay team, or we can always go to this particular field and just untoggle it, and it'll actually remove that lunch line for that particular job only. So just keep in mind, it's a job-by-job setting. That's really all I want to bring to your attention for this particular tab entitled Web Configuration. The next tab is your Fonen and Time Clock Setup tab, and this is where you actually go in there and register the phone numbers that the employees using Fonen would actually use. This is not the mobile punch, this is actually the call-in system. If they're calling in from a cell phone and it's a smartphone that they're actually using, I would urge you to stop having them use Fonen and get over to the mobile app immediately, because that's a much better way of punching in and punching out. But if they're calling from an office phone, if they're calling from a security phone, any of the old desk-type phones, you can actually go through and register their phone numbers here. Right there, put in their phone numbers, so that when the system they call in, the system automatically matches that phone number to the job, does not prompt them for a job number, and they can be on their way. It automatically just, they punch in and they're done. With that, we do have some options underneath there that you can always, when you set up a number, it doesn't hurt you to check or just tap on this or click this button called Find Sites with Overlapping Caller IDs. What that little button will do is when you toggle it, it'll actually go through the system and see if any of the numbers you've entered above in that box have been used by other jobs. And if they have, it'll actually pop up another window and let you know which jobs have that issue. So you can actually quickly figure out if that number is been used or not. When you go into this Fonen and Time Clock Setup tab, you should actually have a one-to-one relationship for your phones, for the phone-ins. So you should have one job with this phone number only. Otherwise, don't bother putting in the phone number, because the purpose of the phone number is to register a one-to-one relationship there. If an employee calls in from that first number, 402-388-2343, the system is automatically going to clock them in to this job. If that number appears on multiple jobs, then the system doesn't know what job to automatically clock them into. Therefore, it's still going to prompt the employee to punch in or punch out and enter their actual job number. So to that, it's just like if you didn't add a number at all into the system. So don't go through the extra work putting numbers on multiple jobs unless it's a one-to-one relationship between job and phone number. Now, if you had a time clock on this job, down at the bottom, you'll see right now it says no time clocks assigned. It'll actually list the asset number for you, the asset ID. So you can see there, and you can actually also see all the times it is set to automatically sync. Now, The sync process obviously sends data between updates from employees, the jobs on the clock, etc. Also sends punches during those sync times as well. So that gives you some information as to what's going on at the job level. Now, mobile configuration is a field or area that is actually blocked out to everybody. And we purposely did that because mobile is something that's actually more and more going to be used more and more. And we do want to preserve the locations, as it shows here, the geo-coordinates of the job site. Now, the geo-coordinates is the actual location of the address as it relates to latitude and longitude. The reason it's important is because the mobile punch is based on geofencing. And this process actually looks at where you are, where the employee is in relation to the job site. So part of that, gone down below, is we have an acceptable punch range of 0.2 miles, which is basically 2 city blocks, 4 more or less. And if the employee is outside of that range, then it's going to send a little message over into your time card screen. It's going to say approval pending. That way the supervisor, when they're reviewing the time the next day, can actually know that there was an issue and they can actually approve that punch or not. But you obviously want to approve it if you want to get this employee paid. Now, as you go through here, we can actually increase this up to 2 miles radius, which equates to a 4-mile diameter, which is a huge area. So we try to keep it smaller to be more concise and more consistent with the employee being on site. But all the settings on here are going to be adjusted by the ePay team. And we ask if you need any assistance for that, just put in a help desk ticket and one of our ePay team members will actually help you out with this. Now the next tab, the first 3 tabs you've probably seen before. We've done webinars for quite some time now, and with us doing these weekly webinars since the beginning, on a consistent basis since the beginning of the month, so beginning of the year, we've talked about those tabs a couple times. So this shouldn't be something new that you to anyone on this phone call, unless you're a new Blueforce user, obviously. But number 4 here might be something, it'll be the first time that maybe some of you have seen this, and this is called the Holiday and Exception Dates tab. Now what this tab does for us, it actually allows us to go through and set specific dates to actually appear as different rate types. Now by default, when an employee punches in and punches out into the system, their time is always going to reflect as regular time, or if they hit overtime, the rate type is going to show up as overtime in the system. That's just kind of the generic setup of our Blueforce system. Now, if you know that a specific day is coming up, for example, my example here shows July the 4th, and you know that that day that everyone is not going to get paid regular, but instead they're going to get paid holiday worked, then you can actually go in the system and set up that particular date as an exception, and instead of regular, on any punches on July the 4th will actually show up as holiday worked in this example. So this comes into play because maybe they get paid time and a half, and we now have this one called holiday work that might be paying time and a half for you. Or you want to know that anyone working on, May the 5th, that's going to be a training day for everybody. So we want everyone to automatically show up as training rate type instead of regular, because it codes differently or whatever it may be on the financial side. So you can actually go in here and set this up. Most people will reach out to the ePay team and we'll walk you through this. But this gives you the opportunity to put in exception dates. Now the benefit here is obviously you ensure that the employee gets paid the right rate on the right day, but it also prevents you from, well, actually prevents it, it helps you out as the Blueforce users, the editors, submitters, and approvers, because now you don't have to go back and spend time changing punches, editing punches, stuff like that to change your rate type. Now it's perfectly fine and legal to change your rate type. It's not going to count against you. However, we have that thing called the correction lag that looks at how long it takes you to make these changes. So if the holiday were to happen on a Friday and it's an extra long weekend or something like that, that correction lag gets affected because you may be a week or a couple of days, maybe up to a week before you make that actual change of a rate type. So I urge you that if you know a certain day or maybe you have a holiday schedule coming up in advance, you can go in here and put in all your holidays, just drop them in here, and then put in all the holiday or whatever the rate type that's going to be equivalent for that. And anybody who punches in that day will automatically be switched over from regular to that new rate. And that is called the Holiday and Exception Dates tab. Now at the very bottom, you do have criteria here that you can build in there to check eligibility of this rate. So we can put in, for example, an employee must have worked at least 30 days to be eligible for this change, for this rate type change or something like that. And then we can actually set that in the system and automatically look at that. There's about 3 scenarios that we can actually go in there and look at eligibility criteria. So I would think everyone, this would be something that would be beneficial. It'll help with your scoring as well for Blueforce compliance or ePay compliance. So we're here to help you with that. Now the shift schedule, I'm just going to briefly talk about this, and I'll probably talk a little bit more about this in an upcoming webinar when we talk about the scheduling module. What this actually does, it gives you the ability to dictate what shift an employee is actually going to be assigned to. Now, as I've talked about in the past, is every employee has a default shift. And that default shift governs kind of some of the lunch rules and some other little side things, side policies or rules that we can set up at a shift level. But all in all, I've always said that shift is nothing more than a label. It's just a way to group employees that are alike that you might want to do something with, okay? So in saying that, I can actually put in a rule at the job that says, instead of going off of that default shift that's on an employee's employee profile, I can actually go in here and say, put some new little rules. So I can say if an employee were to punch in between 4:45 in the morning and 9 a.m. in the morning, 9 a.m., automatically assign them to this shift. Now, for example, if an employee may have a default shift of 12 to 8 on his or her employee record, but according to this rule, we don't want them to use 12 to 8. We want them to say if they punch in between this time frame, automatically use this particular shift. Now, what you'll notice on the screen is the shift is referred to as a temp shift, which means it's only temporary, it's only for the day that they meet this criteria. If that employee goes back and starts working that 12 to 8 shift again, the true shift that he's assigned to, notice there's no rules that apply to that, so he's going to fall under that 12 to 8 default shift because that's under his default shift, and we have no rules that override that. So what this can actually do is we can actually tell the system to only take effect on certain days. Like for this case, only Monday through Fridays is going to actually take effect. So if any employee clocks in at this time on the weekend, all bets are off. Whatever their default shift on their employee profile is going to take precedence over anything else. So this is just a way to kind of maneuver the different rules that we set up at the shift level. Because a good example of this would be that the day crew. In this case, I have a day crew rule that says 5 to 5 here. This day crew shift might require you to actually have a lunch deduction of 30 minutes. So to that, I'm trying to scribble my word lunch here, there we go. You may have lunch in that particular shift, whereas an employee who comes in at 5:30 to 1 a.m. may not get lunch. So this rule setting that we have here for the punch in between settings will govern which shift an employee is automatically assigned to. This works especially well when you have employees that are moving around all the time. If you have some employees that float around, you have some working at night, then you may want them to work the day next day. Instead of having the default shift to dictate all that, you can have this rule put into place that actually would look at the punch-in times and apply the appropriate shift to that employee. So that's really all I want to show you on that particular tab, but it's something that's very beneficial, and I think that's something that would benefit everyone on this phone call. Then lastly, we have the shift differential tab, and this is the one that can be very confusing. So and you have access to kind of doing this on your own if you need be, but I do reach out to everyone and say, you know what, please, if you have any questions, concerns with that, please reach out to the ePay team and we'll help you with it. And this is kind of how it works. We can actually set up rules, and pay differentials or shift differentials are based on typically where someone gets an increase in hours pay. For example, you know, they're getting paid $10 an hour, but if they work at in the evenings between 8 and 12, they get an extra $1 pay. Or maybe there's a union rule that says that they work between 12 and 6 a.m., they automatically get an extra 10% of their pay rate. So based on percentage or dollars, we can set up a rule. And the way this works is, and this is a view that I didn't put in my presentation today, but if I expanded this job, I would see that if this is basically telling me that if the employee clocks into this job and they clock in as a custodian only, that means that if there's an engineer, there's carpet techs, window cleaners, any other task, all bets are off. They don't fall under this rule. This one says specifically we have a rule that looks at this job and this task only. And if they work on this task only and they work any day of the week, Sunday through Saturday, and if they work this custodian task between the hours of midnight and 2 a.m., then they get an extra $1 an hour for those hours worked. So that's kind of how this shift differential works. We go in there and build a rule for you. The system automatically applies it based on the criteria at hand. If the criteria is not met, for example, this custodian punched in and worked from, say, 6 p.m. and he clocked out at 11 p.m., he doesn't fall in that rule, so he doesn't get that extra $1 an hour. However, that employee clocked in at 6 p.m. and worked until 1 a.m. That 1 a.m. falls into this rule. So based on this rule, he would have 1 hour from midnight to 1 a.m. with that extra $1 per hour rate. So this shift differential is literal. So if someone were to punch in at a time that is within this range, or is working at any time where this range is comes into play, then the actual increase would then take effect. Otherwise, like I said, all bets are off. We do have different rules. We have the kind of a regular rule, how it responds to regular pay. We do have some called, in this case, we have one that refers to holiday worked. And then we have another one here that looks at just simply the overtime information as far as the pay rate is concerned. So quick overview. Typically, if we have any shift differentials or any rules like that, we have them all over the country, more so in the unions. We go step by step with you guys when we kind of set this up to make sure that we do understand the rule that is needed to be set up. So kind of going through this, those are some of the different settings on the job level, and they kind of spill over into the invalid punch discussion, because now, what are invalid punches? What's causing these invalid punches? So just to rehash, the invalid punches are best described as employee attempts to punch in or out that require additional supervisor or manager approval in Blueforce. Now, keep in mind that all those punches are referred to as approval pendings on the time card view, and you have to approve them in order to get those hours officially registered in Blueforce. Now, those are some examples at the bottom of the screen, examples of like employees had issues with the fingerprints on the Walter clock. Employee calls in from an unregistered phone number and phone in. Mobile punch, they're outside that acceptable range, etc. These are just some examples that are out there. And notice these were all settings that were in those first 3 tabs on the job record in Blueforce. So kind of more so, these are some examples how the approval pendings would show up on the time cards. You see approval pendings. The major difference of the two here are the backgrounds of the actual punches. So you'll see over here on the right-hand side, these punches have different text colors. If they are in black background with yellow text, that means they are from the Walter device or even from the mobile punch. If they are a green texting with a black background, they are from the Fonen system. So that's a quick way to identify your invalid punches. Now, more so, you have a few more examples here of those different ones here. Now, web punches will appear in gray backgrounds. All right, so kind of more so with this, we have the question is, how do you go in there and correct them? Now, all of our employees, all our editors, submitters, and approvers can do this. And you'll see the word approve. That means is you're just as the editor, submitter, or approver, all you're doing is approving that employee's punch was valid. In that case, the employee's punch having an issue. So that's what the approved selected time cards means. So you go to the one that's more labeled approval pending. You would check the little checkbox. Then you would check approved selected time cards, and the system will automatically apply that approval to the record. Now, what you will quickly notice is when you go in there and approve the selected time card, the system is actually automatically going to prompt you if you want to do that. Of course, you want to say yes. And it's going to change your status from approval pending to timesheet is open, which is exactly what we want. Now, one thing you'll also notice is that the approved punches would show up in orange, and that's perfectly fine. The orange is letting you know that a record was modified. Now, the approval pendings count against you on the ePay compliance because they were invalid punches. We have an invalid punch score, but you're not editing the punches, you're not making changes, so it's perfectly normal when you see this particular orange coloration on the actual time. Keep in mind, approving punches is not acceptable on a daily basis. you need to go ahead and get out of that rut and find out why are employees having invalid punches, and let's address them, whether it be saying a number in the system, fixing a fingerprint, whatever it may be. We need to adjust and fix those invalid punches. And lastly, how do I stop them from occurring? So this is the big one. The big thing to keep in mind is that the first thing at the very top of the screen, correcting an invalid punch is an invalid punch always, regardless how you look at it, it's still invalid. If it's invalid, it's always invalid. So you got to keep that in mind. But editors, submitters, and approvers, everyone on this phone call has the access to make this necessary change. Now, for Walter clocks, very simple. The number one thing and reason why they have invalid punches is simply more times something to do with the fingerprint. And that's because the clock may not be working correctly, or the reader is not clean, it is not dry. We got to make sure that that's happening. We got to make sure that all the clocks are accessible. They're actually easy and way for the employee to get in and out of, get into a tight corner to clock in and clock out. Employees have to be registered. Employees with repeat issues need to be re-registered. And any client failures need to be reported so the ePay team can assist as well. For Fonen, we want to make sure that we have a one-to-one relationship between the phone and number and the job. We want to make sure that all the phone numbers, there's no limit, that are actually registered on the job. And for some reason or another, if we have a situation where employees are working multiple jobs and they have the same phone they're using all the time, then we want to go in there and disable that caller ID match. The system is still going to register that phone number. It's going to automatically look at that phone number when someone's punching in and punching out, but it's not going to cause it to be an invalid punch anymore, because we have identified it being a number that's going to be used at multiple sites. So for each job, we just go in there and disable that caller ID match. Now, as I mentioned earlier, please, if you have a smartphone already in use, stop using the phone-in system and let's go to the mobile app, because the mobile app is a lot better. And keep in mind, registering the phone number is automatically going to default the employee's job number, saving the employee time and from possible error. So make sure that we have all the numbers registered. Now, mobile punch is very simple. It's a up-and-coming tool. It's tech savvy, tech friendly, what do you want to say, but this is the way we want to go with all of our employees. We want to make sure that mobile punch is being used because we can set the radius, we can set all that information at the job level. We can actually, if we need to, we can actually see a view map option on the actual time card. We can actually see where the employee was when they punched in. We can see whereabouts. I mean, it goes to the detail as to whether in the parking lot or were they on the street at the convenience store. Where were they at when they punched in? It's real time, and it's immediately available over in Blueforce. Then lastly, we talk about Web Punch. I didn't talk much about Web Punch in this call because typically we don't have too many users. Most of our users using Web Punch are on the IFS side, but Web Punch is a functionality to prevent invalid punches. The only thing right now that would cause an invalid punches is if we had enabled the functionality to make sure that only certain IP addresses are registered in the system. And in that case, then you would get a approval pending for the employee. Otherwise, we can actually go in there and key in actual IP addresses so we actually know what computers, what kiosks they are authorized to use. So if we're at a customer site, this might be beneficial because we only want them to use this computer. The customer says only use this computer, don't use any other computer. At that time, at that rate, we can actually put in an IP address to register for them. But all in all, that is our webinar for today. That's kind of reviewing the job record. Not much, like I said, at all to review at the job record. We're really focusing on those job settings as far as it relates to the time collection devices, as well as those holiday exception dates, as well as those shift differentials. So as always, I want to say thank you for joining us on today's webinar. We'll have a new topic next week starting on Tuesday and Thursday, both sessions at 2 p.m. Central, and it'll be part of our continuing Mastering the Blueforce, the weekly series. So until next week, we'll catch you.